Welcome to Dental Brain Crops. This is going to be an exciting day. Today, I'm joined with Dipesh Patel of Blueprint Smiles. Welcome to the show, Dipesh.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so excited to have you. So I love talking with you. You always have such a good energy and actually some really unique things that you're doing in the industry. So I'd just love to hear from you. Let's just kind of start at the beginning. Did you always know that you were going to be a dentist?
No, I actually really didn't. In undergrad, I knew I wanted to go into like the medical profession of some sort.
Okay.
I thought I was going to go into, the medicine side of things. It was a family doctor that kind of convinced me to go into dentistry. Ironically, it was at a family outing. I think I was from my first to second year, freshman, sophomore year. He mentioned, he's like, "Hey, what are you trying to do?" And I said, "Just trying to be like you, trying to be a physician." And he's like, "Don't." I was like, wait, what do you mean? It's not kind of what I kind of expected. He's like, "Hey, I have a lot of friends that are obviously in medical and dental." He's like, "Have you explored dentistry? We don't have a dentist in our family. Just go talk to somebody about it." And he kind of was saying more things of like, "Hey, they have a better lifestyle. My friends, they're not on call that are dentists. Just explore it. And if you still want to do medicine, by all means, do it." So that kind of is what started the trajectory. And then I started shadowing dentists instead of medical doctors, and one thing led to another, and it was actually one of the, I think, first, second person I shadowed. I asked them why they picked dentistry, and the reason behind it kind of resonated with me. I think at the time he had a young 5-year-old that played soccer, and he was saying something along the lines of, "I picked dentistry because I wanted to have kids, and I wanted to be able to coach my son's team." Right. Yeah. And so at that time, I was a big baseball fan. I still am.
Same.
Yeah, go Braves. We won finally.
Yeah.
So that was a great thing. And so at the time, for me, it was, I knew I wanted to have kids someday in the future, and I could see myself wanting to coach a baseball team, and, rec league and stuff was always after hours or weekends. So dentistry I thought it would provide that flexibility. And really that was the only reason I kind of switched from one thing to another. I hate to say it, but it wasn't like a love for teeth that got me there. It is the love for teeth that kept me there, right? Otherwise, I don't go to dental school. But that wasn't the original story of why I went to dental school.
Yeah, which is really unique because as we get into our conversation, it'll be like that love and that passion for your priorities and making room for everything has really bled into what you've created in your space, which I love. So I guess my initial question is, when you started out, did you find that it was what you were expecting with that flexibility and able to do everything you wanted to do?
Not really, right?
Okay.
And it's only because I kind of jumped into private practice really early. And the second, as you know, and it looks like your listeners as well, say, no, if you get into like entrepreneurship, your own business, executive life, it kind of takes a little turn at the beginning. You got a lot to figure out, right? So you went from being, 8 to 5 chairside, Monday to Thursday, maybe some Fridays, Saturdays, right? And you get to clock in and clock out. You start buying your own practice, and all of a sudden you don't know a lot of things at all. So now you are required to put in more time at the beginning, which I kind of knew, but wasn't expecting as much as it was at the beginning. So no, it didn't exactly go as planned, to answer your first question.
Yeah. So talk to me about that a little bit. So you get into it and now you realize there are a lot more things and a lot more involvement than you were expecting. So how do you handle that piece?
Early on, I really didn't know how to handle it, right? When you're 26 years old, that's kind of when I kind of jumped into private practice. My claim to fame was I was a negative millionaire at 26, right? Student loan debt, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. And then I bought a practice that I shouldn't have bought. And that kind of started the journey. And then because it was a practice I shouldn't have bought, I actually had to put a lot more time into it. So my first couple of years, I had the energy, at 26, 28, it's not that big of a deal. Your body, kind of keeps up. And, I didn't have other obligations. It was me and my own schedule doing what I wanted to do. But, projecting out into my 30s, and now I'm in my mid 30s, I kind of knew I couldn't keep up at that pace. I knew I was going to have some type of balance of, work and life, and, not making sure I sacrificed my life for work. And that's ultimately what our company started to become built on. Believe it or not, it was really based on what I kind of wanted personally for myself. And then when it's finally started to work, then we said, hey, let's just take it to everybody else and see if we can't create an organization centered around those same pillars.
hmm So when you say, just backtracking just a little bit, you say a practice you shouldn't have built, and there's probably a long list of reasons why, but I know that the way that you like to think about things is like, make everything an anchor for your benefit. And so what would you say, can you give me an example of something that at the time was really difficult and really challenging, but has helped you as you've created what you have now?
Right. Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes is, we never lose. We either win or we learn. Right. And I say we now because everything for me is part of the team. There's no I in it anymore. And early on, it was, I never lose. I or win or I learn. And I feel like as long as you learn from something, it won't feel like a failure, right, to you. But if you don't learn from your mistakes, it will. So early on, when I took over that practice, it was like an 80% Medicaid practice in like the worst part of town. And I didn't actually know that. I didn't know that area. I was kind of sold on it. Maybe I sold myself on it, or an accountant sold me on it, whatever it may be. In hindsight, it was the best thing that happened because I actually had to change everything with that practice. It had paper charts, digital, and it wasn't even digital x-rays. It was like analog film x-rays, old compressors, you name it. It had everything like from the Stone Age of dentistry. And I had to learn every process to recreate it. And while having to recreate it, you learn everything from insurance to, staffing to you name it, right? You have to learn every element of it. And that's kind of why, looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened. Because if I would have stepped into more of a privileged situation, whether I came from money or I didn't have the debt or I didn't have student loans, or let's say it was just a practice I was already doing $1 million and I just stepped in and started doing dentistry, I would have probably felt like I was the reason behind all of it, and I wouldn't have to learn, right? Because you're stepping into a good situation, you don't know any better. And for those that are in that situation, I'm happy for them, but I'm also scared at the same time, because unless you've had the struggle to grow to $1 million, it's very hard to figure it out when things hit the fan. Like when COVID happens, for example, it didn't scare me as much because I'd been through so many iterations of things going wrong at the beginning. But if I was 26 and had no student loan debt and bought $1 million practice and life was great, and then COVID hit, that would have been scary, right? And so you can only connect the dots going backwards, right? So when I'm connecting the dots, I always look at the past failures as experience for my future successes.
Yeah, for sure. That really is the curse and the blessing of building a business is when you have to do things on your own. I feel like, at least in my experience, you're much more qualified to hire someone to do it because you know exactly what you're looking for. But it does take a lot of energy on the forefront and helps you realize, what you're comfortable doing and what you want to do differently, which is kind of where you were able to ask yourself some tough questions and figure out what type of business you wanted to build going forward, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was one thing kind of that led to another, right? So it was my first practice. After kind of figuring it out, and it finally grew. Then we got on to like the second one, and then the second one's harder than the first one in reality because I wasn't practicing there. I wanted to see if the systems would work. That led to some consulting that eventually led to the group that we have, which is more managing, and we have a few locations now. But every element that you go from 1 to 2, from like I guess entrepreneur to executive, whatever you want to call it, it requires a different version of you, right? And so you have to constantly be willing to reinvent yourself because what worked to get you to that point won't work anymore when you're at the second level. And if you fall in love with that element of growing from one thing to another and having to reinvent yourself, then it's a more bearable journey. But you have to be very self-aware when you're going through that process, that you have to know that it's not going to necessarily go as planned, and you shouldn't expect it to, that you shouldn't necessarily be worried about the end result. And if you fall in love with the process of who you're becoming, then it makes it a whole lot easier, right? And so it wasn't, I don't know if it was any specific exercises I went through to go, okay, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. But, I've always been a little bit more on the self-awareness side to hone into, why do I feel the way I'm feeling? Why am I chasing this practice? Or why am I chasing this metaphoric dream that I have? And the more clear that I get, the better the company became. And then now the company is a reflection of the clarity that we had and we constantly want to keep growing it.
Yeah. And self-awareness isn't something that you can just do, if you have time that week. This is a practice. This is a way of existing. I always say that, entrepreneurship is a lifestyle. It's not an activity that you make time for. And so I know that you have some, systems in place in your own, just the way that you conduct your life that are really important to you. When do you make time for that self-awareness? What does that look like? What works for you to stay on top of things?
Right. So, I'm currently the CEO of our company, and I always tell everybody I'm not the chief executive officer. I'm more the chief emotional officer. And what I mean by that is, like, if the team's emotions are great, we're typically doing well as a company. But it really starts with my emotions, right? As the leader of the organization, your emotions unfortunately have to be in check all the time. So for me, my routine, it starts with whatever time I wake up. I'm usually getting up at 5 a.m., but I actually don't touch anything work related till about 7 a.m. So that is my time. And I'm a big calendar person. So I schedule out everything. So I'll even schedule in my calendar, if I'm, going through some rough patches where I'm feeling some burnout or some anxiety, I will purposely schedule like downtime where it'll be hour from 3 to 4, it will literally say you're not allowed to do anything, right?
Yeah.
And it's better because if I'm not emotionally well, then I'm flying off the walls and making reactive decisions. Well, that has a trickle over effect on everybody that I lead, and that's never healthy for an organization. So meditation's another big thing of mine. I will meditate daily. It's part of my routine. So for me, it's like brushing my teeth. And then I meditate, and I make sure, just like I would do anything else, I make sure that it's something I'm required to do every single day, because it honestly centers me. And it, whether I'm actually meditating or mindfulness or whatever I'm doing, it's at least quiet time where my mind is getting a break. So that's a little bit of what I do. I'll try to work out a few days a week, whether it's, lifting or walking, doesn't really matter, but it's just to kind of get out and to shut our brains down, because as executive entrepreneurs, that's our biggest strength and weakness at the same time. Our strength is we're really good at thinking of ideas and executing on them and putting systems and processes in place. But our weakness is because we go 100 miles per hour and we don't know how to slow it down until we hit a wall.
Yes.
And then we'll do something about that wall, and then we'll do it faster the next go around, and then we'll hit the wall faster. And we'll go through that cycle over and over until we realize that it's super unhealthy to hit that wall over and over. So I try not to hit that wall too often. So.
Yeah, which is really funny because, I think that we can naturally have the idea that once we make it to a certain level or reach certain goals, then we'll have more time to do the things you're talking about. Like then we'll have more time to work out, or then we'll have more time to, for our downtime or whatever. But that's actually the opposite, I have found. And so like you, I'm an incredibly diligent scheduler. And I noticed you said you'll schedule your downtime. So do you also schedule like your workouts and your leisure and all those things on your calendar as well?
So when I'm trying to create a new habit, I'm scheduling it all, right? So like if I am trying to train for something, right, then I'll schedule it because it's not something that's part of my habit loop yet, right? But once it becomes a habit, whether it's 21-day things or 90 days, you hear all kinds of reasons of what a habit should be, then I don't have to schedule anymore. So I don't have to schedule meditating for myself anymore. I do it at the same place every day at the same time. It's like brushing my teeth for me, right? So until something becomes a habit, or if I'm trying to make a change, I will schedule it. And then it becomes part of my identity. Then I don't have to really think about it. It's autonomous to some degree, and it requires no effort after a while.
Yeah. Creating permanent results is just fantastic. And it's obviously working for you because you talked about your team, but you actually get to work with your best friends. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the cool thing about the executive team for Blueprint Smiles is it's everyone I've known forever, right? So I've known one since middle school, believe it or not, with undergrad together. The other ones I've known from undergrad or dental school. So at least 12 years now is, we're approaching.
That's fantastic.
It's cool. So it's like a project, right? It's just like a class project with your best friend. So although, there's boundaries you have to, separate, and we separated those very early to separate work from life, and we didn't want it to kind of trickle over. And we had those serious conversations early on that we mentioned that, hey, if this is going to affect our personal lives, our personal relationship, we shouldn't do this. But everybody's been pretty good with it. And because of that, it's kind of fun because it rarely ever feels like work. It almost feels like we're just hanging out with your buddies, and believe it or not, it's leading to something pretty awesome right now. So.
Yeah. So talk to me more about that. Talk to me more about the pretty awesome right now.
So the pretty awesome part right now is I get to hang out with, four of my best friends on a weekly basis, and we get to go to conferences together. We get to learn together. We get to grow together. Our families get to interact with each other. And so I couldn't ask for anything better. Yeah, I'm not on an island anymore. And that's kind of why I created the group. And that's why we keep, adding doctors and teammates to our group, is because in dentistry, whether you're a clinician by yourself or you're a private practice by yourself, you're on an island a little bit. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you're in your thoughts, and yeah, you can go to networking things and meet somebody, but it's kind of cool when you have your own island of people, I guess, that you can, vent to about whatever problems you're having, and they have your back and they have your best intentions. So currently, we're looking at some other locations, but in reality, we don't really judge ourselves on the number of practices or revenue. Yeah, that's the end result, to do well, to support our family, and to support every teammate at our locations. But it's to keep going as much as we want to go together. And where it takes us, we'll find out. But as long as it's fun, we'll keep at it. And so far for the last 8 years, it's been great. And hopefully the next 18 are the same.
That's fantastic. And I know that you care a lot about your team. I think that's one of the things that I took away from one of our initial conversations, was just the way that you talked about your team and the care and the concern that you actually have for every person in your offices. Talk to me more about that. Like, what is your thought process when you're bringing people on and you're thinking about what you want to provide and grow and how you want to develop them? What is that like for you?
So we hire a very specific way, right? And so, I think I mentioned that to you before, that, we don't really hire for skill set. I don't care if it's a doctor position or a new grad coming out of school or somebody who's super experienced. We hire for personality, and we believe we'll train for the skill, because we believe if it's the right personality that's going to fit the right culture with the right people, then in the moments where people are having a bad day or things aren't going well at home, you have a whole support system supporting those individuals. And as a whole, there's an African proverb that kind of says something along the lines of, and I may get it wrong right now, but, one can go fast alone, but far together. And I truly believe that, right? And I believe that we should do everything as leaders in our power to help our teammates in whatever they're going through, personally or professionally. And as long as we take that approach first, that you show them that you care first, they take care of the rest, right? So our approach is to, care first and let them take care of the rest, not the other way around, which you kind of see, unfortunately, a lot in, corporate offices, where the person comes second, that task is first, right? And I personally don't think that's the right approach.
Yeah, well, it's probably a lot easier to show when it's a genuine interest, like I know it is for you. It just probably comes through in everything that you do. So I'm curious, if somebody was kind of more at one of those beginning stages, like that you described at the beginning, and they were in more of a dark tunnel, so to speak, what would your advice be on, how to create something from buying the wrong practice to the organization and the culture that they really want to be a part of for their professional life?
Well, not the mistake per se, but let's say that if the mistake's already been made, it's one of those things that you can't hold on to it forever, right? There's this great analogy about like a water bottle, and this professor was talking about, and you're holding a water bottle right now, which is great. So like, if you were to hold that water bottle and, I told you, hey, if you hold it for an hour, how is it going to feel? You're like, my arm may get tired. If you hold it for a day, you're like, I might have to start cutting off my arm. And if you hold it for a week, you may not have a limb anymore. But the whole analogy is, you can't hold on to the bad that happens in your life, whether it's a bad practice, a bad decision, whatever, because the circumstance is that's not going to change, right? The card that you're dealt has already been dealt. Now you have to learn to play it whatever way you feel like playing it, and just sulking about it is not, unfortunately, going to do anything. The second you start, understanding that this is the, cards I was dealt, now I'm going to do something about it, is when change starts to happen. So to me, that's part number one. If you bought something bad, let it go. Don't have a pity party. Don't play victim mode. You're allowed a little bit of time, but move on, because that circumstance is not changing right afterwards. But as far as, let's say they already have the organization, but they're trying to get a better idea of what to do, I would go, you always hear about like in dentistry, there's clinical vision, which is what kind of practice dentistry do you want to do? Cosmetics, fill and drill, implants, whatever. Then there's a company vision, which is what kind of office do you want to have, right? What kind of environment, culture you want to have. I would take it a step further, and before you do those things, figure out what kind of personal vision you have. See, so I would figure out, what do you truly want out of life first, and then build your company after that element. And if you do, then everything starts to fall into place, because you're not really lying to yourself about anything, because you're truly saying, I'm doing this because this is what I believe I want. And you're allowed to change it, and there's going to be multiple iterations of it, but you will center in on what is truly most important to you. And if you do that, then your actions will be a whole lot more genuine, and they won't be fake. And as a result, you'll feel pure. You'll feel joy when you're doing it, and work honestly won't feel like work anymore. Some days will, but for the most part, it won't feel like pulling teeth, right?
Yeah.
It won't feel that way. So self-awareness, right? I know it's hard, but I would have a true conversation with yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. Is it for the money? Is it for because you want to buy that house, or you think it's going to make you feel a certain type of way? Is it because you're trying to prove something to somebody, or your past self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are all these, self-talks. But if you figure out why you're doing what you're doing and the reason behind it, that clarity becomes kind of invigorating. And a lot of times you'll stop doing things that you thought you were doing for the right reasons when you probably weren't. It was probably some metaphoric ego of yours getting in the way.
Yeah. And sometimes, what I found is that it's not necessarily that the thing has to change. The goal doesn't have to change. You can have the money or the big house or whatever those things are, but not to prove it to somebody else, and not to make up for some mistake in your past or whatever. Those reasons don't really feel good. They don't motivate you with the right energy. But there's usually something else out there that is a legitimate good fuel that you can pull from. It's just kind of like you said, becoming self-aware and clarifying, okay, what is the thing that I want? And what's the real feel good reason that I want to go after this? Because that's ultimately what's going to keep you going through the iterations, through the growing pains, through all of the things until you get there.
Yeah. And it's like for everybody that's listening, you can do like the question game to yourself, right? The why. So why do you want to buy a practice? Because of X, Y, and Z. Okay. What would that do for you? X, Y, and Z. Let's just say I want to buy a practice because I'll think I'll make more money. What would that do for you? I can pay off student loan debt. What would that do for you? I will not burn a student loan debt, and I can buy a house. What would that do for you? If you keep going, eventually you'll get to the actual reason. And for the most part, and I've done the exercise for myself constantly over and over, and I'll typically find all I was really trying to do is prove something to myself or somebody else. And if it was somebody else, I learned to let it go. And if it was for myself, I had to figure out why, right? Was it some insecurities from the past? Was it from my childhood? And the second you figure it out, what's causing all these decisions, you tend to let it go. And then you get to the ultimate reason of why you're doing everything you're doing. For me, it's really just to be happy, right? I ultimately want to be happy. So then if that's ultimately the end result, then why not skip all those things in between and just start doing the things that make you happy? Because for me, it makes no sense to go, I want to work this hard to do this, long hours, not see my family, get tired, to make thousands and millions of dollars, to one day retire at 65, enjoy my life. Well, that sounds great, but then at 65, who knows if you're going to be in great health? Who knows your relationships with the people around you? Who knows if you're going to like the same thing? Why wait for a day that may or may not, unfortunately, ever happen, right? Why not start incorporating those elements into your life right now? And, who cares if you make a little bit less, but if you get to go on vacation, right? More often, you get to hang out with your kids or whatever it might be, right? Those are the things I wish most people would try to figure out early instead of chasing the things they think will make them happy.
Yeah, I hear you. It can be lonely at the top, but you're right. And just enjoying that journey along the way, it's just so much more fulfilling. And again, it sustains you. You can't really keep trudging that path if you're losing people along the way and your whole reason is this, you're motivated by self-restriction. Once I get there, I can finally feel happy. Well, that's not going to keep anybody going.
Oh, if if you're a go-getter, which I am assuming everybody that's probably listening to this is, you will keep going, right? You will keep going. I promise you, right? And there will not be an end game then.
Mm-hmm.
And if you fall in love with the process, great, which is what happened to me. That's why when people ask us what's our end game, we don't really have one. I know it sounds bad in the business world, but we really don't have an end game because we're not chasing an end result to go, we want to end up at 100 practices or 100 million. No, the end game is, for us, is we'll keep going as long as it's fun. And the second it stops being fun for an extended period of time, that's probably our signal we should probably do something different.
That's fantastic. Well, hey, is there anything else that I haven't asked you or that you want to add in before we end our conversation today?
Not really. I mean, if anybody wants to kind of reach out, if they're struggling with it, I'm more than happy to help. Whether it's dental stuff or, the business side, it doesn't really matter to me. I do have one piece of advice, whether it's clinical or business, that I just learned this recently, and maybe a part of me kind of knew it. But we're at our organization, we're all about happiness. That's why we have shirts that say smile, right? For example, we want people to not be burnt out, to not hate dentistry, not want to quit. It's terrible for the industry if that happens. But what I believe leads to it is, we're constantly trying to fix things in dentistry or in business, right? When in reality, I don't believe you can fix anything. You can only manage situations, right? And if people can have a mental shift on the clinical side, the example would be, a patient comes to you and they have this problem and you do your best to try to fix it, doing a crown or a root canal, and then it fails. Then we take it home as clinicians. We go, what did I do wrong? I did this, I tried this. And sometimes it's nothing that you did wrong and the patient's upset or whatnot. And it's because that initial conversation was, there's a problem, a patient, and you're trying to fix all that, right? And when in reality, you should see it as, patient has this issue, you're there to help that issue. And in reality, it's you and the patient against the problem, not you against the problem.
Oh, that's fantastic. So the teaming approach.
Yep. And you're doing everything you can to help manage that situation with the patient. Not you are there to fix their problems, right? And if you can get that through on the clinical side, you won't have days where you go home when there's a failure, and after 100 successes, that one failure, it eats you alive. And for the young clinicians that are listening, you're going to go through that unless you switch that in your brain. And that, I believe, leads to a lot of the burnout because of the pressure we put on ourselves when things go wrong. And the same thing to me kind of applies on the business side, right? On the business side, we're always urgent to fix problems. Somebody comes to you and there's a problem you're trying to fix, and you go, and the fight or flight constantly happens, and that stress constantly builds up. One advice that took me 9 years, 10 years now to realize this is, not everything needs to be fixed. So what I tend to do is I will write it down, even when it seems urgent. I'll write it down and I'll let it simmer and I'll let it burn. And if a week from now it needs to be resolved, we'll resolve it. But what you'll find more often than not is you didn't even need to resolve it to begin with. It kind of fixes itself, and it wasn't that important to begin with. We just brought the importance to it during that time, and everybody started focusing on it, and then you got sidetracked, and then you got tired and burnt out, and we go through cycles of that constantly. And then we wonder why we're always tired, whether you're a clinician or you're in the business world or you're in both, right? It's because we are constantly attached to wanting to fix everything.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of power in language, so when you have a problem or a situation at work, like you're talking about, or a situation with a patient, and then we decide this is complicated or this is bad, those words are really powerful, because now within our fix it mode, we're trying to fix the bad thing. And I don't think that we take enough time really sometimes to be like, okay, so why is this bad? What am I hoping for with a resolution, like you were talking about earlier, and then if that gets fixed, then what? We don't do that whole process. Right. We're just really hyper-focused on the bad thing, and that freaks us out. And so I think this is great advice, excellent perspective to let it just is. This is the situation, and we can manage the situation, or we can see what happens if it works itself out or not, but not labeling it.
Yep. And one other thing that I'm constantly working on, and, since you're a dental life coach, right, the life element of it, and we talked about the dental element right now, but talking about the life element, I'd like to remind people that, whether you're a clinician, business person, whatever you're doing, don't forget, you want to be the best clinician sometimes, and you want to be the best business person. Don't forget to be the best, neighbor. Don't forget to be the best father. Don't forget to be the best, all these other responsibilities that we have. Don't neglect those things because the shiny object in front of you, which is the business or the clinical case or whatever it might be, takes precedent all the time, right? Because if those elements, whether it's your health, your family, or anything else, are neglected for too long, I promise you, your business and your clinical side won't be there forever then. It won't. It's going to not be as productive as you want it to be. So make sure you, as much as focus that you have on your clinical or your business side, you have that much, if not more, focus on the other elements of life that you ultimately are saying you're doing all these things for.
Mm-hmm.
Well, don't forget to take care of that first.